Good evening, Holliston. Welcome to the Monday evening edition, August 17th of the Select Board's meeting. Hoping everyone's enjoying this evening. I wanted to begin this evening's meeting with a coronavirus community update from Chief Cassidy. Chief, if you would please approach. Join us. I will just call out Ms. Tina Hine is not joining us this evening. She's in a better place on vacation.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chief. How are you tonight?
I'm exceptional, thank you. I'm very pleased to report that for the second time since we started having cases here in Holliston, we are back down to 0 active cases. So
Good.
I do not want us to become complacent. I hope that we can continue to celebrate the successes as a community, but we need to remind people of the simple mitigation steps of making sure that they're washing their hands, that they're keeping their distance from folks, and that they are wearing their face coverings when they're interacting with other people. And those 3 steps will go a long way to helping to keep the numbers down here in Holliston.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to our statistics, as of last week, I told you that we had 63 active cases. The DPH number says that we have 64 total cases. So when I publish the weekly update on the town's website tonight, I anticipate that I will do a data correction and indicate that, according to DPH, it was a total of 64 cases, but that, again, everything except for 2 have recovered. There are still the 2 fatalities from early on. But again, the bottom line is no active cases. And we continue to work with the Board of Health and our nursing consultant to find out if there was a case that was entered into the Maven reporting system that didn't get reported to Board of Health, to find out where that discrepancy of 1 case is. But again, let me assure everyone, we have heard from our nursing consultant, according to Maven, there are 0 active cases in Holliston right now.
Thank you. Is that a trend that we see in other Metro West communities?
There are some which have been able to get their numbers down, some sooner than us, but there are still other communities that continue to have active cases, and even some that continue to see slight upticks, as we experienced a few weeks ago, where over the course of a few weeks we saw between 4 and 6 cases over the course of 14 days.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to say, Ben, that's very good news.
It is.
As a community, I think we have to tip our hats to our fellow citizens, as you said, Mike, for their compliance and recognition of how to stick to social distancing rules and so forth. It's seemingly working. So it's a fine place to be in right now.
And it does not come without its challenges. Obviously, there are businesses and there are nonprofits that are impacted with their ability to do their annual gathering due to restrictions on gathering sizes. Folks who thought that they were going to be able to get 100 people together now are told they can only get 50. So it's not without some pain points, but folks are adapting, they're being creative, and they're doing the best that they can.
Well, I think it's got excellent news, especially on the eve of looking at a school reopening of some design in a month. So we're trending well. So that's great news.
We are absolutely trending well. And then a lot of my time in the last week has been spent working with the town administrator with regards to the questions that the board have had around CARES Act funds and what is obligated versus what has been spent, and what we are forecasting between now and when those funds are no longer available to us to expend as a community. And I'm sorry that Ms. Hine is in a better place tonight, because almost every single week she's been asking if we had any compliance information from administration and finance. And this is the week that I could have publicly said that the guidance on reporting did come out from DLS late Friday evening, was pushed back out again this afternoon, and we finally have a path forward for quarterly reporting, and no longer bi-monthly, but now quarterly reporting. First report is due in September, second report is due in October, and we are well situated to be able to comply with the reporting requirements that the federal government is requesting.
So the September report will be for the period ending June 30th?
Will be for the period ending Q1, which so that would be, yes, so that would be April to June. Yes, is due in September, that's correct.
Very good. Now, the reporting, is that in the form of a gateway submission? Is there a compliance form associated with that? What does it entail?
They gave us a reporting deadline. They have not yet given us the specifics because they said those are still being developed by the federal government. And they said that as things change, they would continue to push those out, but at least we know when our report will be due. We just don't know what the format looks like.
But something tells me you're on to what that form might look like, and you're here to talk about that tonight.
We have done compliance reporting before, and obviously it relates to the categories by which the eligible work was done and certifying that. And that's something that, again, I've been working closely with the town administrator over the last week on developing a reporting model, not only for the board and for the FinCom, but ultimately anything that we develop will help us be able to produce those reports with confidence for the federal reporting requirements.
At what point, Travis, do you want to weigh in on the format of the reporting and the tracking of the obligated funds to date?
Is that coming under your report, or do you want to, I mean, I'm comfortable to defer to you.
Do you mind if I hop in
Please,
here?
by all
So we can
means.
keep it all neat?
Yes.
So I think one of the things that we're doing, and some of the concern has been, what we're looking at is the bills that we have to date, which will be charged against the CARES Act, and then the chief has obviously outlined sort of the FEMA process that goes before charging something directly to the CARES Act and that process. So one of the things that was requested that we've put together and will be a report if the select board it likes this model, would be then passed on to the finance committee and any other interested parties, would be to look at the approved or obligated columns by category, by department, that fall within the categories that the chief has laid out previously, that the select board has already sort of reviewed and approved as requests. So, one term could be encumbered. What we're saying here is these are the approved or obligated charges against the CARE Act. The FEMA charges, again, as the FEMA reimbursement has not yet been requested, what we're showing here is the total and then a breakout that the chief has put together of what may be able to be charged to FEMA first, which would lower the amount charged to the CARES Act. And so the total that was received was the $1.3 million. The total that has been approved or obligated through the select board's approval process has been just under $630,000, leaving $687,000 and some change as a balance after that.
I have a quick question just to clarify.
Sure.
When you talk about CARES Act and FEMA,
Yes.
two different funding sources, correct?
Same ultimate funding source from the federal government. The way the CARES Act authorization came from the U.S. Congress was that anything that's eligible for FEMA reimbursement, you need to try and maximize your federal FEMA reimbursement, but the CARES funds, which are now in the bank account for the town, can be used for the 25% local match that's required under the Stafford Act. Normally, when we receive a FEMA reimbursement of 75% for eligible expenses, the town is completely on the hook for that 25%. With this program and this specific emergency, we're allowed to use the CARES Act funds, the $1.3 million that came through A&F, towards our 25% local match.
Let me ask the question a different way.
Sure.
Thank you for the answer. If we're provided $1.3 million
Yes.
for CARES Act,
Yes.
and we show another $125,000 for FEMA eligible reimbursement,
Yes.
does the 125 get obligated against any part of the 1.3?
No,
So
separate.
technically, it's a separate funding source, if you will. The 1.3 is exclusive of
Correct.
FEMA.
Yes,
Got it.
absolutely.
So to date, if you wanted to go on, Travis, and talk a little bit about the total obligations to date.
Sure, so the total obligations, as we've laid out here, would be the two columns together, CARES and FEMA. To the chief's point, when the FEMA reimbursement is requested, assuming that the process works as laid out, as the chief just explained, that would not be put against the CARES Act, and the 1.3 million, the balance under the 1.3 would actually increase. Because we have not requested that funding yet, we just wanted to have one column here that shows all of the funding that has been approved through the select board through this process so far to date. But the process that the chief has laid out is the next step. Essentially will be to seek reimbursement through FEMA, and that will give us clarity on the balance of the CARES Act.
The spreadsheet that we received earlier, and I think, Ben, it's probably the same one you have, right? It shows a balance less the approved or obligated at 687, 419.
Mhm.
In reality, it's more than that, though, isn't it? Because the
Provided
FEMA
fee-
piece
exactly.
will go the FEMA route. So it could be, the balance could be $125,000 or so more.
Correct.
Thank you. That's what I was getting to.
Yes.
We might want to clarify that on the spreadsheet.
So the statement that I made at the bottom, and again, we can change this format. This is why I didn't want to send it out before you had a chance to review it. So the statement that we make essentially is that because the FEMA reimbursement has not yet been requested, we're putting together the approved and obligated of these two columns.
Right.
But what the chief's point has been, consistently is that the process that he must follow is to first run through FEMA. And once we do that, then we'll have more clarity on what is being charged to the CARES Act. And so it's certainly, we could just remove the approved obligated column, but then it sort of implies that the FEMA is guaranteed, and in some instances it may not be.
Right.
So what we're saying is, everything that department heads have asked for, that you have approved, is in this column. It could be charged less against CARES if the process works as it's been described to us.
You had a department head meeting recently, right? Was it last week or the week before?
Last weekend.
Okay. Do the department heads know that the iterative nature of this program is open for their availability? Do they know to approach Mike going forward?
We have discussed it previously. We've talked about emphasizing that again at our next department meeting, and obviously that can be sent out via email in the interim as well, just to remind folks. I mean, I'm not looking to advertise that it's, open season for spending, but I do want to remind folks that if they've got eligible expenses, that it's certainly something that could be considered through your board.
Do you have other parts of your presentation to make? Mr. Sparrow, any questions?
Could you just speak a little bit about what the difference between approved and obligated would be?
Sure. So let me give you an example. So take, for instance, the temporary cooling for the annual town meeting. That was something that was obligated because the board took a vote specifically on July 13th and said, we'll authorize $6,000.
Right.
Approved was back in May, prior to the submission to A&F. I had asked departments to give a rough estimate of what they thought that they had spent and would spend through December 30th, and that was rolled up into our original calculations, which was just under 5, which is why initially I came to the board asking for 550. And the way the board process moved from that point was, after we got the 1.3 million deposited by the administration and finance, the agreement was, if it was approved previously, it was standing orders. Case in point, the core switch that the technology director asked for last week, it was already approved. So anything new would be something else that would be obligated. So that's why we're using both terms, because some of them were a little bit looser in terms of things like the police chief had projected what it might cost in terms of extra cleanings for the jail cell, based on the number of guests that they'd had during the 3-month period up to the submission, and projecting that out through the end of December, saying, well, if I have X number of guests between now and the end of December, this is how much those extra. So the board approved it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's fully obligated, because again, if they have fewer people in that they need to clean up after.
Okay, so it's part of it's timing, and part of it is just the nature of, some of it's kind of an estimate, if you will. It's an estimated cost that we haven't actually incurred yet versus
Correct.
an approved cost that we know.
It's not like a
coming up.
capital request where we actually have a quote.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Sure.
And then, is this, so this is inclusive of things that we've approved. It's not going to include things that are
Unanticipated.
Percolating, and anything that's sort of coming up through the works. Nothing.
Perfect example of that would be when the town clerk last week asked for the ballot box. That was
Yes.
not something that was conceived of
Right.
back in May.
Right.
We brought it, and that has now been rolled up into the approved/obligated column.
Okay. So there's not too many other things that, absent the
I would bring that to you right away.
Okay. Awesome.
Not every department is able to wrap their heads around
Sure.
emergency planning, and especially a
Right.
9-month
Well,
operational
so
period.
where I'm going with that too, though, is just that I think most of these are going to be pretty straightforward. There might be some little things coming in, but there's the big one, the big thing that we're kind of all dancing around, namely the schools. Like, what is that? You know,
Sure.
is there something like they're? I mean, I'm sure they're looking at some bigger things, and I'm just kind of thinking about, you know, where does this put us? You know, is there, you know, have they requested anything additional yet?
We've got great lines of communication with the schools. They had done some estimates back in the late spring or early summer, based on the interim guidance that had been issued by DESI to
Right.
that point.
Right.
Nothing that was related specifically to their specific reopening plans, which have subsequently been submitted. So I do anticipate that within the future, there will be a supplemental request from the schools to the board
Okay.
to address some of the eligible categories of expenses under
Because
the CARES fund.
part of what I'm asking about too is because I want to make sure that, you know, we're not running up against a wall here. You know, whatever the 1.3 million, that, you know, it'd be great if we, you know, we want to spend what we need to spend, but we also don't want to put ourselves in a situation, I'm making it up, that, you know, we have a $500,000 expense that comes up, and now suddenly we're trying to balance between some of these things and trying to figure something out. And I'm just kind of, just want to make sure that we don't get to that where it suddenly becomes, how do we deal with this? That we're thinking about it ahead of time.
Certainly, and we have, again, a reminder to the departments that the money is out there. We'll hopefully eliminate some of that first come, first serve, and then having to weigh conflicting priorities when you have too many requests versus available funds.
Okay, great. Okay, and I like this format. I think it's great. I think the only thing I would ask is that just have a line to John's point about FEMA versus CARES Act money, and then a line just to indicate what approved versus obligated would mean. That there is some estimates included in the approved column that haven't necessarily been expended per se.
Yeah, so again, as we've spent the better part of the last week trying to analyze the data several different ways, I've got pivot tables where we're looking at it by fiscal year. We've got it where we're looking at it by actual expenses. We've got it broken down by department and then by CARES Act eligible categories. So there are a bunch of different ways that we're twisting the data and working together. I'm confident that we can get you a report in the format and the style that is going to give you the not only confidence in what we're asking you to approve, but also how it is that we are doing the best thing for the community.
Okay, great. This is great. So thank you for putting this together. I appreciate it.
Been a joint effort.
So the question would be, if you're comfortable with this, I think, as the chief just said, the next step would be, as we sort of, for example, the $4,000 box for the clerk's office was requested last week, once we get that true number in, the approved and obligated could then be reconciled to what the actual cost is, since that's a great sort of concrete example. And so that would be the next step in this process. But if you're comfortable with the sort of obligated approved column right now, then I would send this to the Finance Committee tonight for review, and then make it available to any other interested parties if you're comfortable with this format going forward.
I'm comfortable with that. I think it has to evolve to include a column of expenditure.
Absolutely.
And eventually reconciliation, as you said, as time goes by, and as long as our friends at the Finance Committee see that for what it is, as an evolving document. I think it works. It's got good detail in it. It's tracking virtually everything that we've talked about to date, and I think ultimately be the content of what the chief puts into the gateway.
Absolutely.
Ben, if I could, you started to touch on something that I think is relatively important. Before this evening's meeting, Chair Stacy Raffi from the school committee, myself, Chief Cassidy, Superintendent Cusker, and Travis and I met with Keith Bidet to talk about the nature of the CARES Act funding that's coming from a variety of different corners to communities like Holliston. It's important to understand that the funding that was made available to the Commonwealth from the federal government has made its way to us in a shape known as the CARES Act. Over $2 billion, I think it was $2.7 billion came to the Commonwealth. And to date, the amount of money that's been dispersed in what's known as Phase 1 reopening has been relatively small. Did you say earlier it's about 25% of the total?
Correct.
Yeah. And what we wanted to understand from the schools was there were other components of that $2.7 million that were beyond this 1.3 strip that we talk about weekly. We learned a great deal about the school's very fluid environment, and you really have to appreciate all of the variables that they're thinking about. It was quite impressive. Related to reopening. I think Holliston is prepared to look at a hybrid model which includes back to school to some extent and remote learning. The technology readiness piece, I think, is addressed here. We certainly saw the looming cost back in May of what the Chromebooks and the remote learning costs would be. But yet there are other costs associated with reopening that may be reflective of more classroom action or classroom teaching and the support within a COVID environment. As the schools kind of understand what that is and they do their collective bargaining impact with the Federation, they shared with us some ideas today that seem to indicate they've got good plans, but they have not yet borne fruit. They haven't really developed into an approved or obligated sense that we're dealing with today. Let me give you a couple of examples. The CARES Act has a flat amount. It's about a $54,000 grant that's going to secondary education support. It's a relatively small amount of money, but we talked about that. Keith has that under control. There's an additional portion of funding, about $25 million statewide, that's supposed to be made available for technology. It's quite clear to us after this afternoon's discussion, Holliston's position in that particular regard for that portion of the grant is probably not that strong. We have low or no expectation of receiving any of that funding. There was another component, which I wrote down the name of it. Chief will tell me if I've got it wrong. The CVRF, is that it?
Correct.
Also, we were calling it the DC Formula Grant, which provides $225 per student to a community like Holliston. And that's a piece that's very fluid, right? So our school business manager is working with the superintendent on models for that. And really what I wanted to hear today, Ben, was that between this CARES Act money that we oversee, and these other components which they oversee, that we were coordinating the effect so that we can optimize the town's resources and those grants with our eyes wide open. One of the takeaways that we agreed on was that through school committee votes, they will be publicly flowing that information to us on a cyclical basis. So, for example, they're estimating some costs right now. They're very much in the air. When those become known, they'll take a vote. That information will then be shared with Chief Cassidy, who will bring it to us for approval. They also have approvals associated with their own grants that I just spoke about that they'll have to report on as well. Our goal is to allow this kind of a workflow to make its way towards us as the executive officer is overseeing the 1.3, and also allow the schools to provide the similar output, I think he said on a monthly basis, to their granting authority, the state. Ultimately, this data has to find its way to our finance committee. And it's our hope that, as I said last week, that we get them good, solid information on a regular basis so that they can track what Holliston is doing. There's a lot, I want to emphasize again, a lot of fluid thinking going on right now. We agreed that it might make sense to get together in another month or two to see how things are moving. Because the big challenge is, of course, this Phase 1 funding ends December 30th of 2020. No one yet knows if the balance of any funding can move forward or if there's going to be a Phase 2 that provides additional, keep school going kind of thinking. Because we don't have the math yet, but based on what we were talking about this afternoon, there seems to be some headroom in that $2.7 billion for perhaps a Phase 2 plan. Still yet to be determined. So with that, I just want to paint a picture that we're trying to coordinate and collaborate with our partners at the schools to get our finance committee what it needs, and ultimately A&F, the Division of Local Services, and DC, the information it needs to fulfill the fact that Holliston's using its money effectively, we're tracking it, and we're optimizing it ultimately so that the town's appropriation is pretty much the last line of funding that's needed. Did I summarize that correctly, gentlemen? I mean, you were in the meeting. Do you have anything to add on that?
No, I thought it's a great summary, and just a reminder, different grant programs have different latitude for spending. What I come to you with and what I ask for approval in specific categories is very regimented based on the guidance that came out from administration and finance. The formula grant that the business manager was describing, the per pupil amount, they have a lot more flexibility on that. So to the extent that we can coordinate and make sure that eligible expenses are going against the proper fund to maximize the experience for the community, I think, and this is why I thought this afternoon's meeting was great in terms of coordination and communication, just to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the community.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
No, I think that's great. I was actually going to ask about the 225 based on your what you're describing, because I had heard about that amount per student. So I think I think that's great. That's kind of what I was looking for. Is I was just hoping, because I know the finance committee has asked. Part of it is to understand like what has been spent, so that they're not getting somebody coming in and asking for a reserve fund transfer, for example, for something that's already been approved for CARES Act, things like that.
Frankly, I don't envision anybody asking for a reserve fund transfer.
I don't envision it
quite
either.
some time.
I don't envision it either. But just I'd rather just make sure that we have a process in place, so that way when it does get to that point, we've already everybody knows where all the ducks are. So
yeah, the process has to. That's a good point. The process we determined today has to begin and end with votes. Committees have chatter. We all talk as elected boards, but ultimately the votes behind them speak. And they trigger certain actions. And in this case, any school committee vote on CARES Act funding is going to trigger the chief to come before us and say, it's coming our way, here's the actual cost. And that makes Travis actionable to report. So we felt that was important, to allow their committee, their superintendent, their business manager to operate in this fluid environment and come around with sometimes last-minute decisions, because I think that's the nature of what they're looking at right now, to ultimately find the right funding mix for whatever that problem has been. And we did talk very loosely about all the categories of spending and the challenges that they're encountering, trying to keep Holliston safe for the kids and teachers this fall.
Absolutely.
So it was a very good meeting.
Good.
Tariffs, do you want to add anything to the discussion either this afternoon or the chief's report regarding the coronavirus community update?
Thank you to the chief. He's put in quite a bit of work, which I'm not telling you something you didn't already know, but I've seen it in action and I appreciate it.
I'd ask any members of our Zoom call if they have any questions for Chief Cassidy or the board or Mr. Hearn regarding the community update for coronavirus. Hearing none. Chief, I think we're good for this evening. Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next week. We'll move on. Warrants. Ben Sparrow.
It looks like we have one warrant. We have a warrant for $1,167,099.23. And it doesn't look like there's any payroll.
All right. I'll accept the motion to approve that warrant, Ben.
So moved.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Carries. The warrant is carried.
And that's the only one we have.
Thank you. Let me just go backwards one step. Chief, I forgot to mention one other item from this afternoon's meeting is there was a collective wisdom that there would be some agreement at the board level that a flow chart of the way this data will move would be beneficial to our board, perhaps the school committee. When you're kind enough to come around and draft that, if you'd bring it back to us as a method to solidify the understanding of how CARES Act money will flow ultimately to its sources, I would appreciate that, okay?
Absolutely.
We have an action item coming up once he gives us the flow chart. You're going to share it with the schools too, right? So that maybe they can take a vote on how to memorialize that workflow, right?
Yes, sir.
Great, thanks. Sorry
Sounds
to go
good.
backwards, but appreciate that. All right. Public comment, Mr. Sparrow.
I have nothing at this time.
Very good. I do not either. Does anybody on the Zoom call have any comments under public comment? I can't tell. I think there's sometimes when somebody wants to say something, right? There's a little flag that goes up. I think we're good though, so we'll move on.
I think IT would tell us.
Yeah. Report of the town administrator, Mr. Hearn.
Sure, so I have a few. A couple of my updates were going to be on the SRF and water, but I believe we have Sean Reese on the line, so I was going to let him do that directly for you and answer any questions. Sean, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can,
hear you.
yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, just a couple quick updates. Number one with the drought, everybody's aware that we're in a drought. The state has just moved its drought advisory to a significant drought. That's across all counties in Massachusetts. What that means is basically it's a more stringent watering restriction. They'd like you to be more proactive in reducing or eliminating outdoor water use. Collectively, if all residents throughout the Commonwealth make the efforts that help to conserve, it'll help ensure that the availability is there to meet essential needs, which really is drinking and fire suppression. So the town of Holliston increased our water ban on July 16th. So unfortunately, that had to eliminate the use of irrigation or lawn sprinklers for all of our residents or all the ratepayers. But we've had great compliance with that, and we can see it in the tank levels when we come in. So I'd like to thank the public for doing that and being aware to conserve their water. And generally speaking, at our maximum capacity, we could pump a little over 2 million gallons a day. We've had to decrease that due to just basically the absence of water to about 1 million gallons a day. So we're at 50% production with our water on a daily basis. Another example of that is if you want to look at individual wells, well number 8 on Maple Street, typically the water level in that would be about 21 feet. The water level in that well is down to 8 feet. So you can see that just the aquifer just doesn't have the water anymore. I don't want to alarm the public. We're still able to meet the demand. So as long as we're diligent and we operate as we are with the conservation efforts, I don't anticipate a further restriction or further DEP mandated outdoor water use. Just
Sean.
complete elimination of it.
Sean, it's John. Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you. I know you're giving a report,
No.
but I'm curious to hear, you just spoke about some water levels in the
Yeah.
well water, tank number 8, I think it was, well number 8.
Yeah, well number 8. Yeah.
Has that level changed a lot in the last few weeks, or is it, as you said, is the aquifer recharging it to that level on a daily basis? Are we maintaining, or are we losing ground?
We're losing ground. So, for example, July 1st, so this is what you would call just the well level. So it's not under operation what the water would come up to or be at. July 1st was at 14.27 feet. July 17th, it decreased to 11.5 feet. And yesterday, August, was it 17th, was at 8.6 feet. So we can see it just slowly over the course of the few weeks dropping. Typically, August and September are our highest production months. So you'd think people would be done irrigating, but September has high demand as well. The majority of the other wells are like that, not quite as drastic, but what happens is we have to, where it's not a treatment plant, we need to reduce the flow. Where it is a treatment plant, operationally we don't reduce the flow, we reduce the run times. So our Dobbingbrook treatment plant would typically run 18 to 24 hours a day, continuous. We run that plant 8 hours a day now. So we've had to make some significant adjustments to just to meet the demand, for the residents.
What kind of meteorological event or series of events would help the aquifer to recharge to the point where that tank is starting to achieve its former level of high capacity? What do we need?
I think we need months of rain. I don't think even if we had a deluge over the next week or two, that wouldn't have a drastic impact in increasing the basin level. think it would take a season or two, if you snowfall over the winter. It takes months to kind of recharge these aquifers and these, we're in the Charles River Basin, these basin levels to come up. So it's not an overnight thing, but certainly, every inch of rainfall helps.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to take months to recover.
Interesting.
Any questions?
Are you all set with your report? Can we accept questions at this point, Sean?
Yes, please do.
Sean, Mr. Sparrow, any questions for Mr. Reese?
I actually met with Sean today, so I'm pretty comfortable with my questions at this time.
Any members of the Zoom community that wish to ask Mr. Reese questions about the status of our water?
He's also prepared to speak about the SRF.
Sure. Okay, Sean, I think we have some follow-up questions regarding the state revolving fund and the application to file for the water treatment plan. Are you prepared to give us an update on that?
Great, sure, yes. I refiled for the SRF last week. The deadline to do that was August 24th, so it is August 21st. So we resubmitted the application with our 60% design completion. We anticipate still on track for 100% design completion in October. So we're on track for that, meeting our goals. So we'll wait to see when the SRF makes the announcements, probably in January, whether or not Holliston was approved for the SRF. When we have the 100% design completion, we'll have a real good target number of whether or not we're going to seek additional funding, or it'll give the town the opportunity to figure out really the approach we want to take. If we receive the SRF, are we going to use 100% of that? Is it going to be a combination of capital, a combination of retained earnings? Those are discussions we'll have to have down the road. And I guess it all hinges on the SRF money.
Sean and Travis, it's a meaningful milestone to file for that application. I would recommend you place that on the website as a milestone.
Yes.
To indicate to the public how we're moving along on that project.
Okay. I did put, I'll do that. We gave them the July update. I'll put that out there within the next, probably tomorrow, and then we'll provide the August update as well.
Sean, before we let you go, I just had a quick follow-up question on the water matter. As things stand today, it sounds like the drought situation in Massachusetts has reached significant levels, and you've given us a report of where our reserves and our tanks stand. Are there any, speaking of milestones, are there any looming milestones that you want to alert us of in the next several weeks that might include additional restrictions on water usage if we don't get to certain levels? Is there anything looming that we should be aware of?
Nothing that I could share. I would have to share this evening. We are meeting demand now. We continue to monitor the wells on a minute-by-minute basis, on a daily basis as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're confident that we're able to meet demand. We've gone through droughts before, but again, it's the cooperation of the public out there, the ratepayers, who really reduced their outside watering, taking efforts to minimize indoor use. I know it's a tough situation. Nobody likes to see their lawn turn brown or their nice plants, go away. Nobody likes to do that. But a lot of people have, and it's those efforts that help.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see anything looming as far as additional restrictions. We work closely with the DEP. If those restrictions had to come by, we would follow their directives and notify the public accordingly.
Got it. So, Sean and Travis, I would just say if there are any other updates or changes to the existing ban, I would encourage them to bring before the board so that we can have a shot at discussing this and taking a vote on what the public needs to enact. But it sounds like right now, status quo, Sean?
Yes, sir.
All right. That sounds good. Anything else to report, Sean?
I have one other item. The Cedar Street water main replacement is complete as far as the installation of the water main. So all the new hydrants are in place, all the services are connected, all the new water mains are placed on Cedar, Sherrill Lane, portions of Turner Road. The contractor has moved over to Hamlin Road to complete that loop where there was no main. We're installing a new water main to connect or to loop that end of town. That will greatly improve some water quality over there. Everything is kind of as scheduled and on budget. So that was real nice to see. We had a couple hiccups, but nothing out of the ordinary other than, daily construction activity. So another project successfully completed as far as water main installation.
That's
On
great
to the
news.
next one.
That's great news, thank you. All right,
All right.
we good to go?
Yep. Thank you, Sean.
You're all set?
Okay,
set?
thank you.
Sean,
you,
thanks
Sean.
for
Thanks for
your
your time.
contribution, have a good night.
We do have a few more.
You too, sir. Bye-bye.
All right, so thank you to Sean. I could have tried to regurgitate a lot of that information, but I think it was good coming directly from him. I have a couple other things as well from other departments before I give just my own updates. So the clerk's office wanted me to point out a couple things. The clerk's office is pleased that so many residents availed themselves of the vote by mail option. Staff and volunteers processed 3,153 requests in 3 days. This is not an automated process, and unintentional human error is possible in a small number of mailings. In the event anyone encounters an error, they should contact the office at 508-429-0601 so that it can be rectified. For those who choose to drop off their ballot at Town Hall, there is a locked silver box attached to the side of the building that can be used until the official ballot box is delivered and installed. And that is on the mail-in option. I would also just like to point out that the early voting option is from August 22nd, which is a Saturday, in Upper Town Hall through Friday, August 28th. And if you go to the townofholliston.us website, there is now quite a bit of information about early voting and returning physical mail ballots as well. So that is some information from the clerk's office. On the facilities side, I know we have James Keast here, but right now I just want to update one thing that's sort of been long-standing. Unfortunately, for the town hall doors, the front doors that have been a topic for quite some time now, bids were due last Friday and we received no bids. Mr. Keast is reaching out to companies that we know inquired about the bid. Through the combis, we could see who inquires, when they inquire. People also called the office but did not put in bids. So we are inquiring as to why that was the case. For a number of reasons, we think it may be that it's a difficult time. The doors are very difficult. The IFB, the invitation for bids specifies quite a bit. They're historical in nature. At the same time, I'm also, from my end, double-checking sort of the bid documents to make sure that we're not stepping on our own feet. But at this point, it's, we're trying to get as much information as possible. It's a project that we really want done, so we will be going out to bid again. This will be the third time. But we're trying to collect as much information as possible because we really want to get this done, and it is a significant need. I would just follow up on last week's update on the facilities as well. The facility condition assessment has been completed. Mr. Keast did that with the contractor last week. Data is being compiled and entered in the system, and this process will take a couple of weeks, so we'll be coming back to you with more information on that. And one other follow-up is that the signs have been installed at Pinecrest. We're trying to keep people off the grass to preserve the sprinkler system. So those signs have been placed and enforcement is now underway, so please keep in mind if you are at Pinecrest. One last thing on the Lowland Traffic Forum that is planned for August 25th. The blackboard message went out to residents in that area this afternoon. Chief, what time was that?
4:45.
4:45 p.m. today. So we feel we've pushed it out as much as we can on social media, the website. We did some mailings to people we thought would not see those, and we have also reached out by Blackboard to try to cover as many modes as possible. Information will be put on the website and the calendar. It is going to be a Zoom call, as we all know, and that is at this point we've received some feedback. And if anybody has anything to pass along to me, otherwise we'll follow the process that we've sort of discussed as we've gone, and hopefully it'll be a successful evening. with lots of community feedback. We'll obviously have the select board meeting on Monday night next week, and then this will be on Tuesday night of next week, August 25th,
And to emphasize, it is a virtual meeting.
virtual meeting. That's all I have for right now.
So any questions of the town administrator, Ben?
No questions.
Any questions for the town administrator from our assembled guests on Zoom? Hearing none, we'll move on. Finalizing the stipend subcommittee charge and profile. Mr. Ahern.
Yes, so this was we discussed it on August 3rd, received feedback, and came back with a charge to make sure that we are looking at stipends or other benefits specific to boards and committees. And we would be looking ideally at a profile of 5 Holliston residents who are not seated on other boards and committees to bring a recommendation back to this board by the end, essentially, of the calendar year. I have here Monday, January 4th. Hopefully they've wrapped it up before the new year and maybe Christmas. So I can read it again if we need to. This is, as we discussed last week, this would be to vote to approve it, and then I will start to try to seat 5 individuals. Would you like me to read it again?
We'll have the clerk read it, actually, if you don't mind. He's getting paid a lot of money to read it, so. And
All
his
right,
stipend.
So the charge of the stipend subcommittee, actually, don't take it. Discuss the use of stipends or other benefits, such as tax relief, provided to volunteer, appointed, and/or elected officials of the boards and committees in the town of Holliston. Research and benchmark the town of Holliston's use of stipends or other benefits provided to boards and committees in relation to other municipalities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts with similar demographics and structure of government as the town of Holliston. Provide a recommendation to the Select Board on or before Monday, January 4th, 2021, regarding the future use of stipends or other benefits in the town of Holliston for all boards and committees, and if stipends or other benefits should be used, determine the appropriate amount of said stipends or other benefits.
As Mr. Ahern indicated, the profile will include 5 Holliston residents that are not currently seated on any boards.
Yes.
I have no problems with this. Do you want to make a motion to approve the charge, Mr. Sparrow?
I do. The only thing I just like, I'll make a motion with a comment. The only thing is that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be right in the charge, I just want to make sure that they're also looking at the impact of adding or reducing stipends in terms of participation in boards or committees, be they elected or volunteer.
Of course.
So that's the only thing. So I will make that motion with that comment.
I will second it with a comment. Mr. Ahern, we're reading a profile of the stipend subcommittee. There's an alternative profile. Should our vote include the alternative or not?
My concern was that I would not be able to find 5 residents. I do already have interest based on feedback from 2, so I'm less concerned than I was on the 3rd. My thoughts here were if we absolutely couldn't seat anybody, it could go to the governance committee, or that if we wanted to potentially look at a 3-member subcommittee or a 5-member that included 2 from other boards and committees. If we wanted to vote this now with just the profile and not the alternatives, and then I could come back to you next week if I'm definitely having trouble, I'd be comfortable with that, if you'd like to know.
That's my preference.
That seems fine with me.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the profile of the stipend subcommittee as read by the clerk. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries. So you'll come back to us, Travis, if we encounter any difficulties with seating, right?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much. The grant of trail easement is next on our agenda. So this item reflects the product that we're getting closer to with respect to upgrading or updating or whatever you want to call it, the project behind Casey's for the rail trail. This is not ready for prime time tonight. There's a couple of things that we need to iron out. I just wanted to let folks know that once this is signed, it would convey an easement for the town to use a parcel of land for parking and recreation behind Casey's. There's a separate committee that has been busy trying to bring that project to fruition using the funds awarded to the town by the Commonwealth. And I understand that some of those plans are moving ahead. So once we hear on the final pieces of this easement from the attorney, from Mr. Casey, we'll bring it back for a board action. But in the meantime, if you could follow up with our friends on the committee for this project to report back on a project and some timelines, that would be great. I think the last time we heard from somebody was back in early June from Mr. Conley, if I'm not mistaken. So some things have obviously changed since then. We'd like to see some updates.
Sure, so on the next Monday, Karen Sherman can give a sort of project update, timelines, and budget.
Great.
And then Mr. Conley has also asked that the Blair Square Committee have some time on your agenda next week to talk all things Blair Square Committee. So I think that would be a perfect time. And then the easement, as we discussed, has one signature. We could certainly discuss signing it with the contingency that that signature would be attained, or we can wait to do all of this next week and wrap it all up together, if that's your preference.
That'll work for me.
Okay. So you'd like to defer action on the grant of trail easement this
Till
evening?
next Monday.
Yeah, be good to do it all together.
Okay.
All set with that, Travis?
Yes.
All right. The capital request policy. The Select Board a couple of years ago developed a capital request policy that has encountered some requests from the school committee to evaluate changes. About 2 months ago, Ben, I was approached by Ann Louise Hanstead about some concerns her group had about the language within the policy. Frankly, some of them were legal, others were more practical. We spent some time wordsmithing the document, and she certainly brought forth some very compelling pieces, which I think are reflected in the revised version of the capital request policy. Have you seen it?
I have. Travis sent it over to me, so I have had a chance to review it.
So effectively, the revisions will provide the school committee more flexibility to the timelines listed in the capital request policy each year according to their school budget calendar. I believe when she was before our committee a couple of months ago, she gave us some examples of areas where the timing between when her committee produces a budget and has to submit it and the timing for some of these capital requests, there was a collision. And so we agree under the revised policy to defer to their calendar as a reason for them to work separately from other users of the policy. However, there were some areas that we did disagree on. I encouraged her school council to speak with our town council, and ultimately there would be no effective change to the kind of document enforcement I think that they were looking at. So the revised policy is basically reflecting that the school budget calendar needs, and that's about it. This has been sent along to the chair of the school committee as well as Ms. Hanstead as well. So if you don't have any questions, we can move forward with a vote to update a vote on the capital request policy.
Do have some questions, actually.
Shoot, go.
So there's a couple things that I'd kind of like to. One of the issues that I was running into, like as I was looking into capital, is if you look at section 34 of our bylaws, it's about the capital improvement subcommittee, and then you compare it to the special acts, and there seems to be some friction between the two of them. Basically, part of the challenge that I ran into when I was on the capital subcommittee was getting to understand who was going to own the so-called CIP, the capital improvement plan.
Yep.
Capital improvement plan that was originally put together by the Collins Center for the town. And part of the challenge is nobody really wanted to own it, and so I kind of took it on, and it really wasn't something that I should have been doing, I think, but that's neither here nor there.
No, actually, it is more than near there. It's a huge issue.
So it's
and thank
an
you for
issue.
doing it, by the way.
But part of
Good point.
that is that because those two pieces sort of like work against each other, it's not altogether clear where and how things get onto the CIP. And the Finance Committee has made clear that the CIP is kind of where they're drawing from, and that things have to be on the CIP in order to be considered a part of the process. So I would like to take a breath and maybe wait a week so I could talk to the Finance Committee about some of this stuff, because one of the things that I'd like to see us do is have some clarity on how the CIP gets updated and what role each of these two groups can play together to sort of make sure that we're sort of making it clear and concise to department heads, so they're not hearing one thing from the Finance Committee, something else from the Select Board. I'd like to sort of make sure that we're all kind of on the same page and saying the same thing, singing from the same sheet of music, if you will.
No objection at all. We're not in the midst of a robust capital request land right now up against any deadlines, so certainly take that time, Ben.
Okay.
A couple of things. This was drafted by council in consideration of the special acts and bylaws.
Yep.
And I know you probably read it, but one area you might want to focus on is item number 5 regarding the Capital Improvement Committee and what its role is in this process, okay?
Yeah, I'd just like to make sure that we have some of that a little bit ironed out, so I'd like to take a week or two. Eventually we'll run into, with the 60 days, where ends up being like the end of August, so we want to make sure that we do move ahead relatively quickly so that we're not putting together a policy that was already too late.
You got it.
So,
Right. So for an October town meeting, if we follow the schedule of October 26th, the 45 days referenced in the second policy description would put us at about September 11th. So
okay.
We can certainly
Okay.
vote this next week if everybody's ready next week, and answer any questions then.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take a chance to try to do that for next week. I don't want to overburden because I know we got a few things on the agenda already, so it might have to get, if it has to wait a week, but I'd like to try to get it on sooner than later.
May I ask any members of our Zoom call if they have any questions about the capital request policy? Hearing none. Okay, Ben, we'll table that for next week.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is recognition of the 100th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment. This evening, the board wanted to recognize that tomorrow marks the 100th anniversary of the not ratification, but the 19th Amendment gaining full constitutional support. The great state of Tennessee voted to grant women the right to vote 100 years ago tomorrow. Massachusetts has been very active over the last year as a Commonwealth, trying to commemorate a number of different events around this historic occasion. Mr. Ahern was kind enough to print out some Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission activities occurring across the Commonwealth. We'd encourage people to visit womensvote100.org to learn more about the events around that. It was interesting when I was researching this. I found that since 1960, presidential elections ever since then, more women have voted in those presidential elections than men, and it's actually not even close. So we wanted to commemorate that this evening and make note of the fact that it's been 100 years. So congratulations to that. And are there any comments on that, Mr. Sparrow?
No, I think, it's always important to remember that we have a right to vote, and a lot of people have fought for that right in different occasions, and it's important to remember that it's a right and a responsibility, and it was earned, and people worked very hard to achieve that right in many respects, and it's important to exercise that right when given the chance, because otherwise you might lose it.
I believe the ultimate ratification happened several months later in 1920. However, the effect is still felt today. So thank you for putting that together, Mr. Ahern. Appreciate that. Moving along. The next item on our agenda is review of a DOT priority letter to our state rep. Over the last several months, there have been a host of public works projects that have come up and come to our attention, your attention, and most importantly to Mr. Reese and our Public Works Director's attention. And in brief conversations with the state rep about a month ago, Carolyn asked for the town to put together a list of prioritized projects that could be brought to the attention of the Mass DOT. Consequently, Mr. Ahern has put together a list. I will not ask the clerk to read this all, but if you would be so kind to read the projects titled
Sure.
Ben, for the folks at home to understand what we're looking to do. And these will be read in order of priority. And our hope is that once this document reaches our partners at the state and with the state reps' assistance, we can start getting some coordination and assistance on the remedies for these various projects. Ben, if you'd be so kind.
So you just want me to read the project?
If you would be
title?
so kind, yep.
Sure. So the first one is the Route 126 Concord Street resurfacing and related work. The second one is Washington Street and Summer Street intersection redevelopment.
Briefly on that, we had a comment, not a comment, but a resident emailed us. She was peacefully at sleep, I think, in her home when a car came barreling off Summer Street, blowing past the
Stop sign.
which is very difficult to see on a good day.
Yep.
And smashed into her parked car in her driveway. It's a relatively bad intersection that needs redesign.
Yes.
And as the letter will point out, it's been the site of numerous traffic accidents. Please keep going.
Sure. The Washington Street and Highland Street drainage improvements. Concord Street, there's a number of condition improvements, sidewalk deterioration, poor drainage, general poor roadway condition. State-owned roadway condition, there's other pieces from Washington Street from Highland Street to Cross Street, and then there's also the Concord Street from Ashland Street to the Ashland Town Line. Washington Street sidewalks and crosswalks. There's a couple in there. And finally, traffic improvement projects. There's some truck traffic issues on some side streets, and it's impacting Washington Street.
Right, we're looking to bring MassDOT into our conversations relative to the Lowland Industrial Park. And down the road, if this Hopping Brook project
Sure.
emerges, there'll be some state route impact as well.
Right.
We believe having a strong partnership with the state is very important to our interests. This letter will be sent along following this meeting. Mr. Ahern, do you require a vote, or are you good to go with the consensus that this letter is intact?
I'm good with consensus at this time.
Very good.
You could certainly take a vote if you'd like to solidify it.
I think at this point, let us take a vote because it is coming from this board and has been publicly discussed. I'll entertain a motion from the clerk to approve the Mass DOT priority list drafted by Mr. Ahern.
So moved.
I'll second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So that passes. If you'd be so kind as to fire that off, Travis.
Absolutely.
Much appreciated. Board business. We have an appointment for an EMT. Do you want to read that out loud, Ben?
So I apologize if I don't do this.
Difficult name.
It's a difficult name, so I apologize if I make a mistake in pronunciation. I'll do my best. It's Melissa Fornagil. So I'd like to make a motion to appoint Melissa Fornagil as an on-call EMT for Holliston.
That's great. I'll second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries. Welcome, Melissa. The next appointment would be to appoint, this is more of the formality, to appoint Mr. Ahern, the ADA Coordinator, Affirmative Action Officer, Affirmative Marketing, Construction Officer, Chief Procurement Officer, Construction Officer, Contract Compliance Officer, Fair Housing Officer, the Metro West Veteran Service District Director, and the Municipal Hearing Officer.
Oh my.
Mr. Sparrow, if you'd like to make the motion to appoint formally Mr. Ahern to those roles, I'll accept that.
I will. So moved.
Okay, I'll second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries.
Looks like you need more hours in a day now, Travis.
Yeah,
To
right.
make all those meetings.
We've reached the end of our agenda. I will ask for any other business.
Did you want to
Ben?
talk about the meeting minutes? The meeting minutes of June
What?
29th?
I skipped right over those.
I
Thank
actually
you
had
very much.
two little, I had two edits,
Okay.
minor edits. I can give them to you offline. I can give them to you now. I can give them to you offline.
No, you
whatever
have to
works.
speak to them now. Go right ahead.
All right, so let me pull them up. Let's see. One of them was Southborough, the possessive apostrophe is in the wrong place.
Okay.
And the second one is towards the end. It said Chief Stone What does it say? The exact language was Chief Stone is. Chief Stone, Matthew Stone was in. It needs to be changed to IN. It is currently INN.
Can do that.
Just the two minor edits there.
Very well, I'll take a motion to accept the meeting minutes of June 29th, 2020.
So moved.
I'll second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks for catching that, Ben.
Sure.
Now we'll move on to any other business. Anything to close on?
I do not have anything else.
Nor do I. You all set? And don't know if we still have some people on the Zoom call. It doesn't look that way, but if there is anybody who can hear us, please let us know if you have any other business to attend to this evening.
Doesn't sound like it.
No other business? Everybody good to go. All right, well, folks, we will entertain a motion to adjourn, Mr. Sparrow.
So moved.
I'll second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Appreciate that very much. Folks, have a great evening. We'll catch you next week. Good night.